gives me great pleasure to bring Steve Lobel up so he can talk to us about failings and success. So, Steve.
I'm going to basically tell you a story, and it's the story of my life. I always like to set some ground rules for this. I've been giving this talk for the last 27 years. The story has changed. And quite honestly, you're witnessing one of my lifelong goals. And one of those goals has been to have an interesting story to tell people without the need for any embellishment. Think about that. You know, we tell stories about ourselves, and you always like to add a little color to it, a little flavor, and so forth. And it's always been my goal to really tell it straight out like it is, and have it be interesting and compelling. I'm 62 years old, and I do consider myself to be quite successful. I have a wonderful career as an insurance salesman with Anchor Agency. I'm vice president of the agency. I'm also chairman of the board of the Albany Symphony. And this particular career is by far the most fulfilling career that I could ever imagine having. And I'm a happy camper, and I wake up every day energized and excited about my life and get to do pretty much everything that I want to do in life. At the same time, I have to tell you that what I'm doing today is the last thing I ever imagined doing with my life. So how did that happen? And I think the story that I'm about to tell you is really an accounting of how I got to this point. My life has really been dictated by coping with failure. One would say, well, why would you dare to stand up in front of an audience of people and tell your life story and expect anybody to be interested? I've learned some things from succeeding, but I could tell you that I remember every single aspect and everything that I've ever done that led to a failure. Just remember one thing: failure is an event, it's not a person. And it's a real simple statement, but it has so much incredible meaning if you think about it. I've had 6 different careers in this region. And if you think about that, that's quite remarkable. All but 2 of them were in totally unrelated fields. I came to this area in 1966 as an undergrad at the University at Albany. In those days, it was called SUNY Albany, and of course, we were having an identity crisis. We didn't like to be called SUNY, so ultimately it became UAlbany. But I fell in love with my wife, Vivian, and I also fell in love with this region. And I'm a huge fan of the Capital Region and a big cheerleader for this place. I was born in 1948, a war child. My dad was a Navy veteran, and born in Manhattan, actually during the blizzard of 1947. Now, some of you were around at that time. And Dad was an interesting guy. He was one of 7 children, and ran away from home at the age of 16 and joined the Merchant Marine. And he was kind of a swashbuckling, interesting guy. His view of success in the world was become a professional. In his eyes, it was to be a doctor, and that was your path to success. Well, one day we were at a wedding. I was, I think, about 15 years old. Right in the middle of this wedding celebration, my dad collapsed and had a heart attack. You know how, and I see signs of recognition in a lot of people's faces. You know, a lot of us have gone through that. And you know how in life sometimes you do that role reversal? Okay, so one day your parent is your hero and everything in your life, and the next day you're the caretaker. Well, that's what happened to me. Finally, my dad came home, and it was a long convalescence. Ultimately, lost his business and had to start all over again, which he did, and started working out of our home. I was always thinking about, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go to med school, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, I might not even make it to college. Ultimately, I did apply and get into the University at Albany, although by that time I wasn't such a great student. I don't know if I was ever such a great student from that perspective as academically, but I got into the University at Albany, and frankly, I was attracted here because the campus had just been built. I was in the first class to use the new campus, and Albany seemed to be an attractive place to me. The idea behind it being that I could be part of something new and something growing. And of course, you know, when I chose my courses, I chose the quote-unquote, if anybody asked me, well, I was pre-med. Everybody was pre-med. So I went through freshman biology and barely escaped with a C. And it occurred to me that I'm going to have to break my father's heart and say, Dad, I'm not going to be a doctor. And I tell you how bad it was, and this is important, again, because it's colored a lot of my life. I rehearsed my talk to my parents on a tape recorder, and then I even thought of sending them the tape instead of telling them personally. No lie, that's exactly how it happened. And my dad, I think, was personally devastated, but put up a good front. Well, now I'm lost in space at school, and I go from one major to another, and I became an accounting major of all crazy things, and that didn't work out so well. In the middle of my junior year, I'm on this business track and business administration, accounting, and I'm saying, you know, this is nuts. And I woke up one morning and I dropped all my courses and decided to become an English major, which has stood me in good stead. But, so in order to do that, I had to take extra classes, and I had to go to summer school in order to complete this English major. Along the way, I convinced my dad to get me a camera. So he got me this great little Nikon camera, and I became a photojournalist and was recording all of the events that were going on campus. And I marched on Washington and went to student protests, and I took pictures of everything. And lo and behold, my photography started getting published in the student newspaper and in poetry magazines and other stuff. So here I was, a photojournalist and an English major. Yet there's this nagging thing, what I'm going to do with my life once I leave this campus. And sort of as a concession to my dad, I got the idea that, well, maybe I should go to law school. That seemed like something that might fit some of the skills that I had acquired. It's funny, but it's true. And don't ask me how, but I managed to get myself into Albany Law School. Fortunately, there was one of the vice presidents of student affairs, Cliff Thorne, great guy at UAlbany, became a mentor. And my life has been defined by a number of mentors, which I think is a great thing. I married Vivian right after graduation. She went to grad school for French education. I went off to Albany Law School and found myself in the middle of this huge class. They teach the Socratic method, you know, the professor sitting at the desk and kind of seats arranged in a theater. And I look around and I already felt a little out of place because I had a ponytail and an M1 jacket on, and everybody else is wearing a shirt and tie. And that sort of defined my law school career, which lasted for 1 year. And they asked me to return, but only if I would repeat my first year. So basically, I flunked out of law school. So that was failure number 2. And I sort of expected it, to be honest with you, but it was still devastating. And I never told my dad that I flunked out of law school. I told my mom about 20 years later. Very true. Along the way, I took a summer job as a clerk in a camera store in downtown Albany called State Photo Supply. And the owners of State Photo Supply, Al Landis and Sam Landis and Jack Sachs, were among the people that Marvin had introduced me to. And there again, my wife had babysat for their children. And so here I am in this camera store surrounded by the love of my life, cameras and photography. And they were actually interested in expanding their business and thought that I might fit in and offered me a job. I worked for them for 9 years. And over the 9 years, we opened 6 different stores, and I was active in that and got pretty good at what I was doing. But basically, I was selling cameras, and then I was helping to run these stores and do the marketing and the merchandising. And I developed a love of marketing. I helped them develop a logo and some materials and so forth. And for a long time, I was having a good time. My dad, by the way, had passed away when a couple of years after I got married, 1972. Dad died. And to this day, that's a little bit sad because he never saw any of my successes as far as he was concerned. I mean, imagine, he wanted me to be a doctor. I didn't do that. I quit law school to take a job as a clerk in a camera store. My poor dad was horrified, absolutely horrified. And so his view of me never got beyond me being a clerk in a camera store. And then he died. So that stays with me, frankly, but I'm dealing with it. 9 years with this company, and I have a lot of friends who have become professionals, lawyers, doctors, and so forth. And I was watching my friends really become successful professionals. And here I am selling cameras. I thought that at some point I might be able to become a principal of this company, but it was a closely held family business, and it became very clear that I had absolutely no chance to have any ownership or equity in this business. And I started getting disgruntled and started complaining a little bit to fellow workers and kind of casting about and looking for something to do. And then I got the idea, well, you know, I like fine art photography, and I'm good at retailing. Maybe I could do something combined. And the catalyst for that thought is sitting right over there, John Greenhut. John Greenhut had opened a store called Posters Plus on Hamilton Street in downtown Albany. How many people remember that? And then Greenhut Galleries. And John and Chris were really enjoying some success with this place and had a beautiful gallery and a brownstone on Hamilton Street, and were friends of ours. And I got this idea, and we went to dinner at John and Chris's house, and I figured, well, if I set up this gallery focusing on fine art photography, and maybe I could sell cameras at the same time and I would outsource my framing and stuff to John and Chris. And so I laid out this idea at dinner, and John looks at me and says, gee, that's really interesting, but why don't you open a cheese shop? Yeah, absolutely true. Now you're laughing, you know. And you should have thought, well, I should be laughing too, right? Because that's, well, how weird is that? How disconnected could a thought be? Open a cheese shop. Well, the light bulb went off. Now, I'll tell you why the light bulb went off. My in-laws are German immigrants and lovely people, and they had a friend named Henry Vormberg. And Henry Vormberg was a wealthy, successful guy and a close friend of theirs. And what was Henry's business? His business was called Swiss Rose. And what did they do? They imported cheese. And over the years, I come to know Henry, and he kind of liked me for whatever reason. I was a personable young guy. And, you know, I like to collect thoughts, and people say stuff to you, so I collect things. And at one point he had said, gee, you know, you're an interesting guy. If you're ever thinking of something, you know, I would be supportive. Very obtuse. Well, I get done with this dinner with John and Chris, and the next day I call Henry Vornberg. I said, Henry, somebody said I should open a cheese shop in downtown Albany. What do you think? He said, well, you know, it's very interesting that you should mention that. The cheese business is flourishing right now. And why? There used to be heavy tariffs and a big dairy lobby that prevented U.S. companies from importing cheese and made it very difficult to bring the cheese in. Well, for whatever political reason, things were reversing themselves, and the imported cheese business was thriving and growing. And as kind of a student of marketing, I did a basic market scan, they call it. And I looked around and I said, well, where can you find cheese in the capital region? And you could find cheddar cheese and, you know, American Swiss cheese and one imported cheese called Jarlsberg from Norway, and that was about it. And the only place you could really go to buy cheese was the Hickory Farms. What that spelled to me in my devious mind was opportunity. I've always had a sense of niche marketing. And so what I saw is, wow, here's something that nobody else is doing. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to do it. And so I pursued it. And as it turned out, Henry had a young guy working for him who had opened his own cheese shop on Long Island and was very successful at it, ultimately sold it and made some money and then went to work for Henry. Henry sent him up and looked around, and as it turned out, John being the clever guy that he was, right below John's gallery was a 400 square foot step-down store, kind of in the basement of this brownstone, for rent. And the rent was $600 a month. And I looked around, and here's this whole row of brownstones with eclectic shops and kind of Greenwich Village-y. And I met with the landlord, and they loved the idea of a cheese shop. And then I looked across the way at Empire State Plaza, and I saw 10,000 people working within a block of the retail store. And I say, whoa, here we go. So the whole concept was we can open this little shop, could be run by one person, but I was going to keep my day job. I wasn't nuts. Well, I was not nuts, but I was pretty stupid because I was very vocal about my discontent with how much I was being paid. And in hindsight, they were paying me pretty well at State Photo Supply. I just felt underpaid and not well utilized, if you will. And on a day I was going to sign a contract with Henry and get moving with this little store, I was invited to the upstairs offices of State Photo and asked to pack up my desk and leave. And so basically I managed to get myself fired. Not very bright. Well, now I was faced with a dilemma. Vivian, by her choice, was home with our kids. By this time we had 2 children that were preschool age, and she was home with them. So I was the sole breadwinner. And now I had to make a decision. Do I get another job, which really I should have done probably, or do I jump into this business I know nothing about and try and make a living at it and support my family? And by the way, we had this new house that we built with a mortgage I could barely afford, and there was some pressure. And my view of life, frankly, was you get a job for State Photo, you work for them for 50 years, you know, you get a pension and a gold watch, and life is good. And that was my view for a long, long time. Now I'm entering a whole different world of thought and opportunity, if you will. So I decided I was going to jump in with both feet. And so we opened the Cheese Connection on Hamilton Street in April of 1980. And within a couple of months of opening the Cheese Connection, some good stuff and bad stuff happened. The good stuff is the media found us and really liked us. Another interesting thing is there were some intrepid people who found our little shop and came in. And of course, the people that we attracted were kind of world travelers, sophisticated people, maybe transplants from larger cities. And they were thrilled to find this imported cheese shop and gourmet food shop in Albany. And so now I'm faced with the fact I'm surrounded by 40 different types of cheese and logs and wheels, and how do you even cut a quarter pound accurately? You know, it's like, oops, it's a half a pound, do you mind? And I didn't do that on purpose, but that actually sold a lot more cheese that way. But then they would say, well, what does that taste like? Okay. So I was faced with that dilemma. But here's what I did that was smart. I never, ever pretended to know what I didn't know. And so instead of trying to come up with some BS story about how this tastes, I said, well, I don't know. So I cut a chunk of cheese off and I handed them a piece, and I would take a piece, and then we'd have a conversation. And what happened is these wonderful people, many of you are here, became stakeholders in my little business. But it became quickly apparent, unfortunately, we were in the wrong location. And by the way, people who were working for the state, not to be critical of them, were not about to pay $5, $10, $15 a pound for imported cheese. They just weren't the market. Now, along the way, caterers found me because we were carrying products that you couldn't find elsewhere in the region. And you remember Joe's Deli? Joe became a great customer, as did Jim Rua, who's a great friend now at Cafe Capriccio, and he had a catering business, and Dottie Meyer, and a whole bunch of people. And I got to know them, and of course they were making prepared foods. So now I said, well, if I could sell cheese wholesale to them, which I did because I wanted to turn it over, maybe they'd be willing to sell me their product wholesale, and I ended up in the catering business. So at the end of every day, I would pack up my little station wagon with cheese platters and hors d'oeuvres and stuff that I bought from my friends, the caterers, and now I had a little catering business, which at least enabled me to go out in the community and not wait for people to come to my little store. Along the way, Jeff Feil is the property manager from Stuyvesant Plaza, and everybody knows Stuyvesant Plaza, yes? Okay. Well, in 1980, Stuyvesant Plaza did not look like it does today. Stuyvesant Plaza was a throwback to the 50s, strip shopping center, aluminum and glass windows. Every store looked identical, backlit fluorescent signs, and Ed Swire, who had just taken over management of the plaza, had a vision for Stuyvesant Plaza. And I don't have to tell you what the vision is because you could see it. Well, he actually approached John to put a store in there, and John was quite successful where he was and wasn't interested in moving. But John said, well, why don't you go down and talk to Steve? And he did. I knew Stuyvesant Plaza because one of the state photo stores that I had managed was in Stuyvesant Plaza. So I knew all the merchants. Frankly, that would have been my ideal location, but I never thought that I could afford to open a shop there. And there was a 2,000 square foot space available. Now I'm in 400 square feet, which is about like this. And I had a meeting with Ed Swire. They had a little men's shop called Dad and Lad that had been vacant for a year, and Ed was just waiting for a boutique type shop, and talked to me, and I said, you know, I'd love to do it, but I looked at that shop and it was such a large space. It was 5 times what I had. I said, listen, can I rent the front of the store and then grow into it? And he was incredibly generous. And not only did he agree to that, but he granted us some money to build a different kind of a storefront. Again, this is all about friends. You know, the guy who designed my storefront, literally on a napkin, was Steve Einhorn Yaffe. And I played tennis with Steve and Eric, and went to Steve, and he came up with this unique little design and sketched it out for me. Now, I agreed to move to Stuyvesant Plaza. I'm losing my shirt in business at the Cheese Connection. I made one big mistake, though. I never took a loan out from a bank while I was creditworthy. So now we're operating this business. And by the way, I didn't know that much about operating a business other than the merchandising and marketing. The guy, Henry Vornberg, who had invested in me, had a different set of expectations of me and expected me to understand business better than I really did. So here we are. We're in the middle of the wrong location. I got an opportunity to get a lease at the ideal place. Henry bails on me and wants his money back. Fortunately, my father-in-law bailed me out of that financial situation. I signed a lease with Ed, and in 1981, just a year after we opened this first little store, we opened the Cheese Connection at Stuyvesant Plaza. Now, what was happening in our society in those days? In 1981, we were in a major recession, if you recall. Interest rates were through the roof, like 18%. Things were going crazy, and the two-income family was developing. In other words, women were going back to work. And I got the idea, well, somebody's got to cook for families who want more than frozen dinners. And as I saw what was going on in New York City and learned a little bit about the catering business, I decided that I got to do more than cheese. And so through my good friend Jim Rua, we hired a chef, George Reese, who was a great cook. So we built a kitchen, and we decided that the mix was going to be not just cheese, but prepared foods and other gourmet items. Along the way, I had become friends with Michael and Wendy London, who had a very successful bakery in Saratoga, Mrs. London's. And Michael's father-in-law was delivering his fresh croissants and baked goods to our little store. So that was another part of this mix. All right. Now, through Ed's money, I started building the Cheese Connection at Stuyvesant Plaza. And I started looking around for investors. Well, nobody would give me any money. I was already losing money on the books. The banks wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't give me any money. And now I really had a dilemma. I'm committed to a new lease, an old lease, construction, and I have no idea how I'm going to finance this whole thing. Absolutely true story. Somewhat embarrassing, but true. I also learned a lesson. Are there any bankers in here? I'm going to insult some bankers. I also learned that bankers don't like to lend money to anybody who needs it. Some voices of recognition. But it's true. So here I was. I needed some money. I was creating these business plans. Our whole first year at the Cheese Connection, sales were maybe $100,000, and I probably lost 25 doing it. I had no personal income to speak of. And now we're building the store. I was projecting maybe $250,000 in sales, which I thought was reasonable, and it was the right place to be. Well, I was desperate. I was absolutely desperate and had no idea how I was possibly going to fund this thing. But we had carpenters working. I had paid cash. The equipment that I used for the little store was used equipment, and the guy who sold me that equipment gave me credit and actually delivered some equipment. So imagine this scene. We're in this store and surrounded by construction, and somebody told me about a new concept in financing called leasing. And there was a bank called North Star Bank, a guy by the name of John Rafalco, and we called them in. And so I got dressed up in my best suit and invited these guys in. And I told them this story. I said, you know, and it was sort of the truth. I said, we're building this place for cash, but my friends are telling me, you know, maybe you should finance it. And what do you think? That's all I said. Well, you're going to find this very hard to believe, but it's the absolute truth. Now, mind you, the prime rate of interest was 18%. Money was going for 21% in those days. You might imagine that bankers were somewhat anxious to lend money where they could. They offered me $75,000 at 21% interest, no personal guarantees. It's hard to imagine a time when that could happen. Reluctantly, I signed. And that gave me the working capital to build the store. And so we built it, and from day one, I knew we had something going because people showed up. It was a great plaza, things were busy, the media got hold of us, and life was great, and the cash register was ringing. I hired a whole bunch of people. What I didn't have control over was money going out. There were no computers, there were no accounting systems, and I was a wild man. I had this one-write check system, and I was just writing checks all the time and depositing money. One day there's a knock at the door, and two big guys in gray suits come walking in, introduce themselves. This is a couple of years into this thing, and they're from the IRS. And I was cordial, and can I give you anything? Well, I had neglected one minor detail in my business operation. It's called withholding taxes. I wasn't doing anything about it, and I owed the IRS $36,000. And the deal was, you either come up with the money in 24 hours or we're padlocking your doors. Absolute true story. Well, I want to tell you about some things I did right. One of the things I did right was I got to know the banker very well, John Rafalco, and he became ultimately a friend. And I really shared everything that I was doing with John, other than I hadn't told him along the way I wasn't paying withholding tax. I didn't even really know that much about it, to my shame, actually. But so I presented this whole situation to him. I said, I've got to pay the IRS $36,000, otherwise they're going to lock our doors and we're all going to lose. As luck would have it, by that time, and this was 83, 84, interest rates had come way down. The whole financial situation, we had come out of a recession, things were improving. And John said to me, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to refinance everything and reduce your interest rate. I'm going to give you extra money. And there's one qualification. He says, you're going to buy a computer and you're going to learn how to manage a business. And I did. I spent the next year behind the scenes learning how to run Lotus 123. It was the first version. There were no hard drives even in those days. But I had this, I paid $5,000 too for this computer. But I learned how to do it. A good friend of mine taught me how to run the computer. I did cost centers. I did a full analysis of our business. And with, of course, the extra working capital that John had loaned us, got things squared away. And we were off to the races. And business grew year after year after year. By 1987, We were doing over $1 million in sales. I had a successful catering business, but I was working my butt off. Now, to give you a sense of my life, I would start early in the morning. We started baking croissants at 5 in the morning. There were parties to go out. We had a full kitchen staff. And then at night, we catered parties. So I was literally working 24/7. And lots of, I could tell you a million stories, and maybe will in the next round of things or in the book. But I was working around the clock, and we were succeeding. Ultimately, what was also interesting is I had designs on bigger things, of course. And through John, I got to know some other people, one of which is sitting here. Where's Dick? Dick Frederick. And John, who had become a really good friend, introduced me to Dick and another guy in Valencia, Mark Gold, and we formed a partnership. The idea being we were going to expand the concept of the Cheese Connection because we thought, it was either franchisable or we could do multiple locations. And so we were moving toward that. And they also were just great mentors and really helped me understand the business. I was always good at making money. Where I really had a challenge was holding on to it. And I can tell you, just as a life lesson, as an entrepreneur, we often think that we have to do it all. You got to do every aspect. You can't trust anybody to do the work for you. And that's really, for those of you thinking about starting a business or growing your business, that's a big mistake because you can't do everything. And it doesn't diminish your skills if you look for people who are smarter and better at what they do in the areas that you don't have a skill set. But I didn't do that. I had started to with Dick and John and Mark. And then something else happened. Along comes a guy by the name of Dan Cowan. And Dan fashioned himself as a great gourmand and actually was a catering client of ours as well. Around 1987, Stuyvesant Plaza had sort of a lot of companies redid their storefronts and they brought in more boutiques, and it was on its way to its current format. But they had an old beat-up Grand Union, 25,000 square feet, where Talbot's is right now, as a matter of fact. And they made an announcement that they were closing that store and we're going to move uptown. Well, I don't know. I must have a problem with solvency because I looked at that store. Now, doing $1 million of sales out of a 2,000 square foot store is challenging, I have to say. The front of the store was less than 1,000 square feet. It was a one-aisle store. It was jam-packed with food. People still remember it fondly because it was filled with great food and cooking aromas. And it was like, Pavlov's dogs. You would walk into that shop and start drooling. So there was no way you could escape without buying food. And that really worked to our benefit. But now I look at this 25,000 square feet, and my first idea was, whoa, here's my opportunity. Now, I had been all over the country by that time, seen gourmet shops doing incredible things in large spaces, especially Balducci's and Zabar's, Dean and DeLuca in Manhattan, all these great stores. And that's what I wanted to do. That was my goal. So I went to Ed Swire and I said, Ed, I'm interested in that space. Well, I got to tell you, along the way, Ed did his share of support financially for me. And but for his generosity during real hard times and letting the rent go for a while, I wouldn't be around today. So I owe Ed a huge debt of gratitude. Well, Ed looked at me and said, you're an idiot. Get out of my office. You're just paying the rent now. don't talk to me. Well, I was determined. I said, listen, just give me right of first refusal. I have an idea. And my idea really was to build a store around the core of what was the Cheese Connection, and then add other vendors like a greengrocer and a butcher and a fishmonger and a florist, and create this kind of large gourmet shop, but with subcontractors so that I could do it in an affordable way. And I thought it was a great idea, and I started talking to people about it. And then along comes Cowan, and I was introduced to Dan more formally because we had the same accountant. And of an afternoon, Dan invites me to his home on Van Wees Point. He had just bought this old shack of a home, and he was in the process of building it into a Japanese home. And a real over-the-top character. I don't know, are there any pictures of, well, you'll see him. Dan Cowan, the best way I could describe Dan is, imagine Ernest Hemingway with a big white beard and a big beer belly and an imposing character. That's sort of what Dan looked like. And so I agreed, after multiple phone calls, Dan calling me, I agreed to meet with him. And he sat me down and he said, you know, I understand you're interested in this food shop and so forth. I want to work with you. And my first comment to him was, you know, I finally gained some independence. I'm starting to earn a living here and I have a good life. You're going to kill me. And I don't think I could do business with you. And then he says to me, well, how much money do you think you need to build this place? So I really had no clue. And I'm sitting there now, again, this is 1987. So I said, I need $2 million. And he looks at me and says, okay. Yeah. He said, how much do you want to make? I'm thinking, all right. Well, I want 100,000. Okay. And I said, my wife needs 50,000 a year. Okay. Now, I could tell you this. Dan, the type of man he was, and this is a true story, and I won't denigrate him too much, but he had a Mont Blanc pen, and it had green ink in it. And when you would ask him why he writes with green ink, he said, very simply, that stands for money, and that's what I'm all about. And that was his head and his ego. Well, the bottom line is, I had a sense that I was about to go into a deal with the devil, but I was really, really tired of working 24/7, and I needed to make a change in my life. And so a lunch meeting led into a dinner meeting, and the next thing I knew, we were partners. And we started building Cowan and Lobel in June of 1988. And it was a craziness. I've been through my life where I've had not enough money, and that has its challenges. The fascinating part of my relationship with Dan Cowan is we had too much money. Because he said he's sitting with millions and millions of dollars in the bank waiting to do something. He said, I want a world-class store. You've got money to spend. Go for it. Now, the deal was we were supposed to capitalize everything. In other words, my thought of this was we're going to use his money, going to build this store. By the way, I had to give up 75% of my ownership to do this deal. And but I figured 25% of a multi-million-dollar business was not so bad. And at least I would have extra employees and I'd elevate myself to a different management position. Well, that was fine. And he lived up to his promise in terms of financing this business, and we did build a world-class store. I know many of you used to shop there, but I took it to heart, and I was out of control spending money. I mean, our checkout counters had imported marble tops, and our work counters were all Corian. And we spent that $2 million plus some building this place. And I could have done it for a lot less, I'm telling you. But I was into it. And so we built Counter Lobel. October 1st, 1988, we opened our doors. 1,000 people crowded into the store. We did $10,000 in sales, and the media went nuts, and life was good. Now, let me tell you, along the way, we had to hire 60 employees. Okay? I was used to being an entrepreneur, working behind the counter. I had, I think, max 18 employees in my other shop. I knew every single job in the place. I knew everything that was going on every minute of every day. Now, all of a sudden, I've got 9 middle managers. We had a paid board of directors. There was a lot of stuff going on that was large corporate in look and feel that I was unprepared for. And we opened this shop, and it was heady stuff, and it was, I mean, to give you an idea, $10,000 was a good month in past businesses. This is one day's business. I ate, slept, lived, and breathed every nut and bolt going into that place, every design element, every marketing element, every product, everything that we were doing. And I have to say, I did a good job. But on the other side of it, I had no idea how I was going to manage all this in a competent way. And I was right, because I was not a manager of a large company like this. I was not cut out for that. And so my skill sets weren't matching up with my job responsibilities. One thing led to another, and what started out as a nice marriage turned into a nightmare. And it was a 2.5-year battle between Dan Cowan and I, including shouting matches at board of directors meetings. And it was really a failure of a partnership as much as anything. He confronted me one day. He said, you know, we can't continue along these lines. He said, you buy me out or I'll buy you out. So Cowan and I part ways. And frankly, this was 1990, 1991. I literally walked out the door in 1991. The deal was, though, and I got some money for my interest. It was not nearly what it should have or could have been. And in fairness, while the business was generating quite a bit of money, we weren't there yet. We weren't there where the business had an intrinsic value. And let me bring up another point. For those of you starting a business, when we did the Cheese Connection, it became a lifestyle business. You know what I'm saying about a lifestyle? Lifestyle business is one in which, and you always hear it, well, why, you know, you want to minimize your profits so you don't have to pay too many taxes. And you could lead a good lifestyle. Well, that's great if that's what you want to do for the rest of your life, you know, and you can maintain that and the business will continue. But if you ever expect to sell a business or gain any value in it, you can't do that. You've got to nurture a business. There's a great lesson that I learned in life. It's called retained earnings. And it's the lifeblood of any successful business. And so my advice to anybody starting a business is build a business as if you're going to sell it, and build life into the business. Feed the business. Let it have retained earnings. Pay your taxes. You want to pay yourself, but pay your taxes and build the business to sell it. You can stay in that business as long as you want, but the bottom line is when it comes time to sell that business, if you want to and need to, you'll at least have something of value, because there's something called goodwill that everybody talks about. It's worthless. And I didn't understand that lesson. And so when I had to take Cowan on as a partner, part of the thing that hindered me was the fact that there was not yet enough retained earnings. But worse than that, I felt naked, okay? Just imagine, you know, I had my Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame with this business. I was all over the media, and I was served on multiple boards of directors and what have you, and everything revolved around my being the owner of Cowan and Lobel. I was Lobel. Well, all of a sudden, I was Lobel, but I didn't have Cowan and Lobel, and I felt very diminished. So my immediate need was to find another business to buy. Together with a cycling buddy, an old fraternity brother of mine, who was on the fast track at GE and getting tired of what he was doing, we looked for and found a business up in Saratoga, and it was a screen printing and embroidery business. Again, once again, something I had absolutely no experience in or understanding of. But it appealed to me emotionally. And so Phil and I bought this little business after lots of wrangling and a lot of time, and the advice of advisors who knew better, suggesting that we shouldn't do it. There was no margin for error. It was a substantial business, but there were challenges to it, and we were told not to do it. Here's where some arrogance plays in again. My view of myself was, well, I lost Cowan and Lobel, but that was taken away from me. But look at how I built it up, and I fixed it, and but along the way, I mortgaged my house 3 times to keep this thing going. And my view of success was, you know, you just keep at it and you persevere, and eventually you succeed. There was no, you know, failure was not something I even contemplated. It was just a long, harder journey, perhaps. But ultimately, you want to succeed, you succeed, and the only way you lose is if you give up. Well, it was a 2.5-year downward spiral that started almost from the day we took over the business. We bought it by the time we bought it, it was the wrong time of year. We lost our whole first season. We had clients like Baseball Hall of Fame and Basketball Hall of Fame, and this was a business that, you know, looked like it was substantive. Our art director left. Our sales manager left because they thought they had no idea the business was for sale, and that they expected to be owners at some point, kind of like I was with State Photo. So they were really disgruntled, and the whole business dissolved, and it was a 2.5-year downward spiral of problems into which I kicked every last penny that I could get my hands on, including every credit card I could tap into. And in those days, every time I took a $10,000 cash line of credit out of a credit card, another company would send me another one. And again, figuring, well, I'll just keep doing this until I succeed. And one afternoon in April of 1993, we had a little factory up in Wilton. I'm walking up the path in the morning to the factory, and walking down the path is our banker, who shall remain nameless, and a little guy next to him, who the banker introduced me to as a locksmith. 18 people lost their jobs, and now I drive home. Well, just imagine what it would be like to confront your loyal wife and say, honey, I bet the farm, and today I lost it. And that's exactly what happened. I lost everything, and money I never even knew I had, and more on top of that. And a strange thing happened that, well, it wasn't so strange, you might imagine. Obviously, it was tumult in the family, and it was not a pleasant day. And I went to bed that night, and I'm lying there, and all of a sudden, a flood of recognition came upon me of the reality of my situation. We had 3 mortgages on our house by this time, $50,000 plus in credit card debt, all my kids' college money tied up. Everything we had worked for and earned over the previous, 20 years, I suddenly realized is gone. I mean, gone. And I had an anxiety attack. And I don't know if you've ever had an anxiety attack, but the best way I could describe the feeling is if you've ever been to the ocean and you get hit by a wave, and the wave turns you over, and now you're underwater, you don't know which end is up, and if you're ever going to breathe again. That's how I felt for the next 8 hours. 8 hours. My heart is racing and pounding. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And quite remarkably, I opened my eyes the next morning and realized I was still alive, although I wasn't certain I wanted to be. And I've got to say, I never thought about suicide. But I can tell you, I, at that point in my life, understood what could drive somebody to that kind of desperate measure. That's how serious and bad it was. And what was so remarkable about it is, up until that moment, I never thought about it in those terms. Up until that very moment, when all of this recognition came crushing in on me. So now what am I going to do? I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror and I realize, my life is just in the dumper. And I looked in the mirror and I said, I don't have many choices here, but the only way out of this dilemma is to make sure that every day going forward is going to be better than the day that preceded it. And that if I was ever going to get out of this mess that I created, it was one foot in front of the other and just do little things each day to fix it. Well, of all the strange things going on in the world, that night there's a fundraiser at the University at Albany. Now, I'm an alum. I was also serving on the board of the foundation of the University at Albany, and I'm invited to this fundraiser. So you would think that's the last place in the world I would want to be. But it wasn't, because along the way, and this is a recurring theme, I think whatever success I have in my life, I owe to giving back to the community. And along the way, conversations had taken place as I was thinking about something else to do with my life, that maybe being at the university might be a good fit for me in a weird, tangential sort of way. Went to the party, and I got this idea that, because as part of the foundation board, I saw everything going on behind the scenes at the University at Albany. This was pre-nanofab, pre-Cestum, pre-East Greenbush campus, and all the stuff that's going on now in technology. I saw that happening from the foundation's point of view, but I knew the business community didn't know about it. And I confronted Pat Swigert, who was president of the university at that time, and said to him, Pat, I think the university needs a director of marketing, a liaison between the university and the business community. And by the way, I'm your guy. Now, I've got a bachelor's degree in English, flunked out of law school, I have no academic credentials. And I was just locked out of my factory. I have no resume, by the way. And I'm asking for a job from the president of the State University of New York. Now, I'll tell you what was going on in Pat Swiger's mind. Here was an alum and a donor to the university. He figured, gee, you know, Lobel's a decent guy. Let's give Lobel a soft place to land, and, you know, he'll have this job for a little while. He had some quote-unquote soft money, discretionary money through the foundation, and we'll give him a job. Within a week, I was planted at a desk at the University of Albany. My title was Interim Director of Marketing, the job that never had existed before. And there I was with a very nice salary and health insurance and stability. And while Pat thought it was a soft place to land, I saw this as my savior. I had no job description, but I realized very early on that I better raise more money than they're paying me, which I did. I went out, I funded a healthcare symposium for Karen Hitchcock, who later became president, by going to our vendors. And at that time, the Clintons were trying to change healthcare, very much like what's going on today. They wanted to do a statewide symposium, and they had no funding for it. So I got all our vendors associated with the university to pay for it. I went to the athletic director. He needed scoreboards. PepsiCo at the time, the Pepsi bottling plant, which is local, had the contract for all the beverages on campus. So I went to them and I went to the marketing guy. I said, we could use some scoreboards. Guy opens up a big catalog. He says, what do you want? Like $100,000 of scoreboards later, I'm a hero. And I said to the guy, I said, you know, why haven't you done this before? You've had this contract for years. He says, nobody ever asked us. So therein developed a philosophy in my life as well. You know, never be afraid to ask sort of the impossible. Anyway, I stayed at the university for 3.5 years. I became, interestingly, another one of my life's goals was to teach on a college campus. As you might see here, I love to talk. And I always had this idea that I would love to teach on a college level, and got to know the dean of the School of Business. And I said, listen, and I had done these lectures, so I sort of had some familiarity with that. And I said, if you ever need a teacher, let me know. Sure enough, one of the professors got sick. Next thing I know, I'm in a classroom with 150 freshmen, and I'm teaching a freshman course in marketing. And I have to say, in fairness, I was a hit, because I would teach not academically. I assumed people could read the textbook. So I said, you guys read the textbook. I'm going to teach about life. And so I always did this lecture at the beginning of class. I brought in guest lecturers. That led to 7 terms of teaching marketing, ultimately marketing management in the MBA program, all with a bachelor's degree in English. I went on, once they realized that I wasn't leaving the university so fast, they wanted to find a real job for me with a budget line. And as luck would have it, the director of alumni affairs left town. They installed me in an alumni house, parachuted me in, had a staff of 7 and a secretary in a building, and didn't know what the heck I was doing with that. But I let the staff do the work, and I became an assistant vice president, alumni affairs. Around that time, I told you about mentors. And I pointed out Marvin, who's sitting here in the audience. Marvin is the founder of Anchor Agency, and throughout my life since college has been my insurance agent. And insurance agents get to know a lot about you because they have to. They know about every aspect of your life. And so Marvin had shared all this stuff. He was one of the good advisors that told me not to do some of the stuff that I ultimately did, though I didn't listen. And so we had a very strong relationship, and we're getting together all the time. as I'm talking about how good things are at the university, and Marvin's telling me about stuff going on in his life, and he had some challenges at the time. And so we shared this, and it was a great conversation. And I go home, can't sleep that night. I'm thinking, what the heck is going on in my head? Didn't know what to do about it. I called my partner, and by the way, something I'm very proud of. The guy I crashed and burned with in this business, my fraternity brother, we could have killed each other because we were each to blame for this failure. And we could have easily just totally had a major fight and with good reason killed each other. We didn't. We both realized, and I'm proud of this, that friendship is more important than money. We had a solid relationship, and we were in it together and crashed and burned together, but we were still friends. And to this day, he's still one of my best friends. So I called him up and I said, I'm having this dilemma. I can't sleep. And he said, you got to call Marvin. And I said, well, what am I going to say to Marvin? You know, I don't know anything about the insurance business. He's got a successful business. It was nothing I had ever thought about. And one day I couldn't take it anymore, and I called Marvin up. I said, Marvin, not knowing what to say, is there anything else we need to be talking about? And Marvin said, I can almost let him say it, well, as a matter of fact, we should talk. I've been thinking about the same thing. And that led to one breakfast after another, during which Marvin explained to me about his business. Now, I got to say, without embarrassing him, Marvin is one of those people who, in my life, I have most admired. Not just because he's a successful businessman, but because of his philosophy of giving back. And what presented itself is that we both realized that there might be an opportunity for me to work with and at Anchor Agency and work with Marvin. I don't recommend any of what I'm telling you as a way to proceed with your life, by the way. January of 1998, I walked into Anchor Agency to start my next career selling insurance. Now, this, I have to tell you, is a difficult and complex business. Part of what I thought was that, gee, everybody knows me by this time. You know, everybody will want to buy insurance from me. Well, guess what? I had changed careers, first of all, so many times, nobody knew what the heck I was doing. Second of all, there's a thing about trust. You know, insurance is, you've really got to trust somebody you're buying insurance from. Well, why the heck would anybody trust me, even though they know and like me, and I was a cordial guy? Doesn't mean they're going to do business with me. My experience at the university, though, enabled me to see the future a little bit. And what I saw at the university was what we see today in emerging technology. And all of that stuff that you see going on was in its germinating stages. And being a niche marketing guy, I said, well, what can I do in the insurance business that nobody else is doing? And so I got the idea that maybe there's something in this technology stuff. And so what I did was, and again, a little bit of luck intervened. While I was director of alumni affairs at Albany and teaching in the MBA program, I came across a guy by the name of Frank Poor, who at that time had just graduated with an MBA and founded a company called Commerce Technologies, and had to rent a space in the then just completed Sestum building. He needed an insurance policy. I had hired him and his study group to create an interactive e-commerce website for the Alumni Association for our goods. And Frank called me and said I needed an insurance policy. And I went in And, you know, we became good friends, and I heard stories. It was Frank and an idea sitting in an empty office telling me about this great technology he was going to build, which he went on to build. So he was my first tech company. Then I joined the CEG, and I started going to these fiestas, and I went to every technology symposium I could. And for the longest time, you know, I was pretty aggressive. I had to sell some insurance policies. I would always lead with, "How's your insurance?" Well, you know, that's instant death because everybody would run the other way. So I developed a theory about marketing, and I call it marketing by showing up. So I just started showing up. And I went to the seminars, and slowly but surely, through Frank and other people, I started getting introduced to other people. And so the people I sought out were young entrepreneurs just starting up companies, the people that not everybody necessarily wanted to talk to because there was really no money in it. And they're getting a little worried at Anchor because they're saying, well, you know, that's good, but you got to get some real business in here. I did stuff. I made myself available, shared my experience with building a business, and developed a clientele that are now kind of the A-list of emerging technology companies in the region, and have built I'm happy to say, a very successful business. Every bit of my success, I have to say, ultimately I owe to giving back and being involved in this community. But beyond that, I'm working on the book because, as you might imagine, there's a lot more good stuff that I could tell. We're going to try and do a book, and I've got a number of volunteers who are going to come and be parts of panel discussions, and we're going to explore this whole idea of what failure can do for you as a learning experience. And so you're not afraid of it, because it really is just an event. It's not a person. And I'm, I guess, evidence of that. And I love life and enjoying every day. I just became friends with Benjamin Zander, who preaches the art of possibility. Yeah. Fantastic, right? And it's amazing that I even got to meet him through the goodwill of David Allen Miller, my buddy at the Symphony. And he came to town and just kind of was transformational. So I really believe in the power of this positive message. And so we're going to work on it together, because I think we've got nothing but potential in this region, and I certainly want to continue to be part of it. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of this. And to be continued.